You know, in the studies and the class we've had, we know that the Israelites have gone through so much turmoil. You know, ousted out of their land, even after God gave them the promised land, ousted out of it. And every time when they get a chance to come back, there's this metamorphosis that they have to go through. Which means that they didn't just get on a train or a plane and just fly back into Israel. They took the long way. And the reason why they took the long way is to get them back to where they should be. You know, when someone is coming and taking over your country, and they take you up to where they are, you pick up their customs, their languages, all of that stuff. To the point where they go through generations, and those generations have gone through a complete metamorphosis, where when they come back, they bring those customs and all that other stuff too. So we're looking at that area right about the time when Cyrus had let them come back, and they divided themselves. I think that the term for that is called the Axion era. So we'll go through a little background here on this. Now we all know that Passover was one of the holiest fests for the Israelites. Central to the Israelite worship out of the book of Exodus. The escape from Egypt was considered the most powerful display of God's perseverance. And God provided and revealed that he was unchanging, faithful to the covenant God made with Abraham, Sarah, and their descendants. The theme, deliverance, was key in celebrating Passover. The Feast of Passover was observed at the same time each year according to the lunar calendar. And the festival was celebrated on the night of the full moon. Now, the calendar was not the same as it is now. July didn't come into after Julius Caesar, July, and Caesar Augustus, which is August. It made out 12 months of the year. Now, there are many folks that sought to deny the death and resurrection of Jesus. They tried to discredit the gospel of Mark. Mark would discredit also, undermine Luke and Matthew. So there was a chain reaction that was going on from all those different books. Okay. It is also reflected that in these books, the bits and pieces, that while they were going through these celebrations, there were a lot of eclipses that had taken place in there, and those eclipses took about 3 hours. So when you sit down and think about someone that's coming out of Babylon, and they believed in the stars instead of the Lord, looking at the eclipse, the prophet just turned them right out. Because it reminded them of where they come from. Now, back in those days, we're still going through sacrifices, which meant sacrificing animals and stuff like that. And only those that were circumcised that participated in this ritual. Now also, another festival that took place during that time, the festival of the unleavened bread. And we recall there, before they got ready to leave Egypt, it was told they only take some unleavened bread with them because they didn't have time to wait around for the yeast to work in it. You know, just take it the way it is. It's one of the first things that they had a chance to see that the Lord would provide for them. One of the other things that they did, or that had taken place back then during the Passover, is that when they sacrificed an animal, namely a lamb, they would take the blood and smear it around the front door frame. That when the angel of death came by, it was smeared around the front door frame. The angel of death would pass right over the house. And those that didn't, they would take the first son. So those are two big, not going to call it ritual, but celebrations taking place during that time. And also, none of the high priests entered the holy place during the Passover. Now, when we sit down and think about the Passover in contrast was concerned with that deliverance from bondage, along with gratitude, joy, and the recognition of God's faithfulness to the covenant. And we'll see that the story in here with this is a transformation from all of those other gods and those other pagan things that they were out there celebrating, because it picked up and went with them through the years. So when they came back, when the Israelites got back, there was a succession of different kings that had taken over. One we're going to discuss was only in the seat for 2 years. But what he brought back with him was a bunch of idols that had been placed out there all over Israel, whether it was in Judah or if it was in Jerusalem, in those 2 areas. In order for Joshua to go back to celebrate, he had to get rid of all those idols. So that's what the story is about today. Joshua celebrates Passover. It's out of 2 Chronicles, 34th chapter, verse 8, 14 through 27. Background scripture, 2 Kings, 22 through 23. 2 Chronicles, 34 and 1. If you all recall, this past Wednesday night, we were talking about that in Bible study. So there's some overlap in those things. In fact, Kings and Chronicles, we have gotten into not disputes, but conversation, just looking at this. What the question is for the upcoming week. We both got the right answer. She might say it's the King, I say it's the Chronicles, but it's the same thing. They just overlap each other. So if I could get someone to read.
Josiah celebrated the Passover to the Lord in Jerusalem, and the Passover lamb was slaughtered on the 14th day of the first month. He appointed the priests to their duties and encouraged them to serve for the Lord's temple. He said to the Levites, who instructed all Israel who had been consecrated to the Lord, put the sacred ark in the temple that Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, built. It is not to be carried about on your shoulder. Now serve the Lord your God and his people Israel. Prepare yourselves by families in your divisions, according to the instructions written by David, king of Israel, and by his son Solomon. Stand in a holy place with a group of Levites, for each subdivision of the families of your fellow Israelites, the Levites. Slaughter the Passover lambs. Concentrate yourselves and prepare the lambs for your fellow Israelites, doing what the Lord commanded through Moses.
Amen.
Amen.
All right, thank you. Preparation phase. We're looking at. At the beginning of these verses here that Sister Adams just read is in the beginning of 2 Chronicles, chapter 35, verse 19. And from the bookends of this account, the celebration of Passover in this text was not only an act of obedience to the law of Moses, but it was also an act of covenant renewal. Key word, renewal. And to go back to the way things were, in order for you to properly celebrate, we have to go back and redo everything. Now, Passover had not been celebrated for some time, or at least not in the manner that King Josiah intended to celebrate it, who reigned over Judah from 716 to 687 BC, celebrated an extended Passover after he had renovated and reopened the temple. One key thing there, the temple being renovated. And one of the things that we recall, those leaders that had held them captive, and they finally got turned loose. You know, like the Sister Adams said last week, God can take and use anything and anybody to get his will done. The same thing with Cyrus when they turned loose out of Babylon. Cyrus was a pagan. And the first thing he told them to do was go back and build your temple. He gave them everything, all the resources that they needed there. Now, both these observances, Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, one by Hezekiah and the other by Josiah, are detailed name to the word. And they killed the Passover on the 14th day of the first month. This statement here, out of that first verse, they killed the Passover, becomes clear, but realize that the writer of this book was talking about the Passover lamb. But the phrase on the 14th day of the first month is sometimes in late March or early April. So you see, there's a difference in talking about the months. And like all the pastors said it all the time, that a lot of that stuff was taking place during March and April. So we're looking at 10 months instead of the other 12 at that time. The writer of this book presents Passover celebration as firmly rooted in the law of Moses. King Hezekiah deviated from that stipulation regarding the first month, but had good reason to do so. Hezekiah's Passover observances in 2 Chronicles and Joshua's Passover in 2 Chronicles invited the post-exilic reader of Chronicles. In other words, much later after it was written. Here you got a new set of people that is picking up what they should have done a long time ago. Okay? It's still the same book. It's old, but it outlines the way things should be done. Now, King Joshua had established an agenda. We'll probably take a look at this with great skepticism at church and state combinations the way it is today, but not so in ancient Israel. Here we see the king as a civic leader. A civic leader, not an anointed leader. Authorizing and directing priests or religious leaders in their forthcoming role, getting them prepared. Be prepared to go out and teach to the people. That's the only way you're going to get the word going, and we are converting back the way we were before. Before when we left it. Joshua weight of the monarch behind the priestly service as King Hezekiah had done. The word charges reflects the idea of task or responsibilities. Task or responsibilities. This is outlining what you should do, outlining what you should do, what you should do. And one of the things that he talked about in there was not actually picking up the temple with your hands. You carry it around with the sticks on the shoulder. The little bars that across there. You recall in another Bible study that we had, anyone that came up and touched the temple like that, they just over. Wasn't supposed to. Test of their obedience there. Now, and said unto the Levites that taught all Israel, which were holy unto the Lord. That's verse 3 through 6. It's pretty helpful for us when we're understanding this, the point that all priests are Levites, but not all Levites are priests. They were tasked with that. The Levites' main mission was to take care of the temple and the grounds around it. Since they were doing that, we as citizens or believers were to ensure that they had the substance and all that they needed so they could continue their job. So one hand shook the other. In Germany, they call that a Gesellschaft. We help each other. Farmers do the same thing here now. Brother Benson had a farm, he had problems with his equipment. I'm supposed to go and help him with it. Oh, we look out for each other. Now, these teachers were responsible for guiding Israel in the lawful conduct of the nation's rituals. For that way, in being personally holy unto the Lord. To be holy is to be consecrated. Being consecrated means that you are set apart from the others. Doesn't mean you're better. But these have their own mission and what their goals and all should be. bring attention. You know, you ever hear somebody when they're talking or something like that, or the leader says, well, my policy is this. Policy is a goal. He just gave the Levites a goal. You didn't tell them how to do it. Procedures tell you how to do it. You can't go opting outside of those procedures. Okay? If you got to sacrifice the lamb and keep the fire burning, keep it burning. All right. Put the holy ark in the house which Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, did build. This reference to putting the holy ark in the temple recalls the initial placement of the ark there, about 300 and some years prior to that. David had reigned from 1010 to 970 BC, with his son Solomon reigned. Immediately after that, to 931 BC. After him, we don't know why the ark was no longer there. This is part of that transition. One group was trying to get them to go back to the religious rituals that they had before celebrating the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But somebody had to move the ark. It doesn't actually say that, but I bet it's that same king that brought all the Bibles back. Okay. And I thought I saw his name up there. Amon. King Amon. And now, this guy was evil. Now, I didn't go and nail David's head to the wall or nothing like that. Like Nebuchadnezzar did. But he was evil. He ensured that those idols were placed all over Israel. Just as the ark was to remind us of the task and all that God has given us. And we are commissioned, just as they were back then too, also to continue to spread the word of God, but they went one step further with the Levites. Okay? This guy put those things all over the place. And one of the reasons why to think that he moved the ark was because it symbolized God's commitment to Israel. And Amon didn't want him to be committed to Israel. You know, I mentioned before, a civic leader, not an anointed leader. Amon didn't last long. It's about 2 years. Okay. Read a little bit more into it. He's like Hussein, no. He never slept in the same place all the time. They moved around because he moved people out. But they finally got rid of him. Now the Levites were the only ones that are authorized to carry the ark. And the original instructions were that they were intended to carry the ark on their shoulders via poles. And thus Joshua directed his scenes curious. Perhaps he was aware of the first disastrous attempt to transport the ark to Jerusalem. A lot of people fell to the wayside. You see the old church that fell to the wayside. And it was because they misunderstood. They weren't as versed into the way that how the ark should be transported as the Levites were. And the Levites served God by carrying out their duties to those that were listed in the First Chronicles. These duties changed when the immovable temple replaced a portable temple. A portable temple. The Levites were to prepare themselves for service by organizing themselves by their respective clans in the house of their ancestors. If you were here at Bible study tonight, the pastor talked about those clans. They were preparing for war. Whether it was a house of Renetta and all of her kids, a house of Abraham and all of his kids, or the house of this and all his kids, like 600-some thousand if they had to go to war. But they were given the mission according to the clans that they belonged to. David, king of Israel, provided a list of these clans in First Chronicles. Solomon and his sons followed the same pattern to document it in the Second Chronicles. Levites, like priests, rotated their service according to the divisions of their ancestral families. not since the days of Samuel.
So, at that time, the entire service of the Lord was carried out for celebration of the Passover and the offering of burnt offerings on the altar of the Lord, as King Josiah had ordered. The Israelites who were present celebrated the Passover at that time and observed the festival of unleavened bread for 7 days. The Passover had not been observed like this in Israel since the days of the prophet Samuel, and none of the kings of Israel had ever celebrated such a Passover as did Josiah, with the priests, the Levites, and all Judah and Israel who were there with the people of the group. This Passover was celebrated in the 18th year of Josiah's reign.
Thank you. So all the service of the Lord was prepared the same day to keep the Passover. Apparently, they at that time had gotten the word out that this is what we are going to do within our plans to get us back to where we were. Hopefully no triplets. King Amos and Joan, that you would hope by that time that prior to the transition taking place, a complete different generation was in place. New minds, new bodies. You got a lot more time to get them indoctrinated to what they should be doing. A lot more time. So these verses here sum up the various preparatory details. All told, at least 41,400 animals were available for the sacrifice. That's the ongoing sacrifice. Now I tried to check and see how long the angel of death was flying over the house, whether it was one night or not. But that's a lot of houses, a lot of blood to be smeared. Those that were non-believers also were going to fall to the wayside. Now, a considerable number of these animals were needed also to feed the people. Part of these celebrations did involve meals. Okay. And they did them both at the same time, not separate the way they were before. One of the reasons why for that, so that everybody can get the same word at the same time. We've all played that game before, you know, when you pass the word on down, by the time you get to the last person, it's something completely different than what started out. We take it and interpret things the way that we want it, not the way it's said. That's why obedience is so important. When the pastor mentions, well, you know, I put $1 in there, pastor, instead of 3 pennies. No, I did 3 pennies. They say put $1 in there, put $1 in there, still got to put 3 pennies. That's called obedience. Now, outside of feeding the people, also for those burnt offerings at the altar of the Lord. Now, the Old Testament lists 4 types of blood sacrifices: the burnt offering, the peace offering, the sin offering, and the guilt offering. Which means that not only were those citizens involved in all of these, the priests and the Levites also. Walk on this earth and committed the sin in the wrong place. We all do. I'm like, Pastor, I had a past. So I started out part of my narcotics law. Still today don't know how I wound up Frank. But it happened. Somebody's looking out for me because I'm still here. So all of those 4 types of blood offerings that took place, and in order for it to be effective, they had to make sure that the burning continued. There were certain parts. Well, other parts had to go to the Levites so they can continue their mission and what they had going on. Now, one thing that distinguished these different types of burnt offerings was that the meat was available to eat from peace offerings, but not from burnt offerings. Peace offerings. In other words, it separated that from how you were worshiping, being involved in this activity, and not, thank God, blessing each other now the food is ready. And to go out and to make a meal and give it to folks knowing that that meat has been cursed. It's not good. Now, bulls were often used for the burnt offerings, and the whole animal was burnt to God. It's a dedicatory offering where the worshiper gave God everything and expressed total commitment. Now, as we know that there were several types of animals. This time last week we talked about those offerings, even to including doves, lambs, I guess goats, all of them. There's certain ways and certain things that these offerings were used for. And they couldn't have a blemish. Couldn't have a blemish. There in 17, the children of Israel that were present kept the Passover at that time and the Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days. And these meals continued throughout that week that followed as a part of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. Technically, this feast is distinct from Passover, but since the two occurred next to each other on the Jewish calendar, they were treated as one single celebration. One single. You got them all there, you don't want to miss anybody. That makes sense. Let's do it all together. And practically speaking, they talk about it also in the 22nd chapter of Luke. But during the first Passover celebration, the Israelites were prepared to flee from Egypt. Hence, they consumed the Passover meal hastily as a result. This is where the unleavened bread came in. You make the bread, you can make the dough rise and everything and all that, but they didn't have time for that. They had to get up and get out. And one of the first tests that they went through with that is that they had to keep having faith in God and don't try to take more than what you were supposed to have. What did some of them do? They took more than what they were supposed to have. And when they reached into the little bag to get it, they rocked. That was one of the first tests that God gave. Moses told them, don't do that. That he would supply. And just expanding on that, when they did find out that they were about out and started losing faith, Moses sent a prayer up. And then the next morning, the manna, which was bread, and the quails came up to him. You see quail just come up to you? Kill me and eat me. But that's what happened. And there were a few other tests that had taken place there. I'm not understand on that. And there was no Passover like to that kept in Israel from the days of Samuel the prophet. Neither did all the kings of Israel keep such a Passover as Josiah kept. Now Samuel considered the last of the judges and the first of the prophets. Third of the judge were pretty good wild. Thus there had not been such a Passover as Josiah had kept it. He kept this going on for over 400 years. So the basis was laid out for the first. And in order for people to continue in step in line with that, you have to continue to ensure that they're educated on what this is, why it is, which is so basic and important that we start bringing our kids in the church early. You gotta bring them in early. Some people might call that conditioning. They call it conditioning. There are other countries that are out there here still today. Kids go through conditioning. Go tell the German beer's poison to see what they get. You know, they've gone out and drinking that beer early. And to them, they've been conditioned that it's something that they can continue to nourish their bodies, quench their thirst and all. The same thing here is with the Word of God. You have to know it. Now, during the Passover, after their exile there, about 106 years later, notice the big length of time. No figures for the number of animals sacrificed were given from the latter, but comparing numbers at two dedications for the temple could be pretty insightful. Now, especially during Solomon's period there. Dedication to the first temple involved 142,000 animals. 142,000. While the dedication to the second involved a little over 700. And when we read about the attendees, it included all of Judah, and Israel. We remember that these two tremendous attempt to transport the ark to Jerusalem, or 8 nations identified the southern kingdom of 2 tribes and the northern kingdom of the other 10 tribes. If you all recall the difference in those words. All 12 tribes, but 2 sons were from another mother that was outside of the original tribe, but they still counted. Still counted. Many of the members of the latter had been exiled 100 years earlier. Thus, all of Israel were referred to the few that had not been taken. 19 states, in the 8th year of the reign of Joshua was this Passover kept. 8 years it took to get this prepared. That's a lot of training, a lot of conditioning, a lot of initiating. Now, you keep in mind how we do Sunday school right now. We're all in here together because of the lack of space that we have in our chapel over there. But if you take a look at the books and all of that, now the kids at different levels have different training levels. And the reason for that, we have been in this Bible for a pretty good while. There's a lot we know already. We just have to relate back to it. But to the kids, you got to define more. You got to explain more. And when they get to be up there around our age, they done seen it so many times that it just reinforces what they learned before. Oh, Bloom's taxonomy. Now, there were a lot of workers that were out there and other spirits within them, other languages in them, spirits and idols. And it doesn't make any difference where you go, there's always going to be someone going to come up behind you. Oh man, don't pay no attention to that. That's not true. That's not true. They're always doing it. These are all driven by Satan. They're all driven driven by. And I still say today, that one of the best things that could probably happen to us, our generation, being able to go online. One of the worst things that have happened to us in our generation, being able to go online. The Spirit's come at you in different ways. Different ways. And I mentioned the last time I gave Sunday school that you have influences all around you. Whether it's your next door neighbor, we have influence here amongst us. We go to school, we go do this and that, and every time we come within a different, what I call a community, there are spirits in there that try to influence you some other type of way.
That's right.
They're going to always be there. The test that comes to us is that we put our feet on the ground. Are we still walking with God? Or are we listening to those spirits? Another quick funny story that I want to conclude. There were folks in Germany that thought that blacks grew tails at midnight. The older folks. Yeah, they thought blacks grew tails. I had a guy come into this German restaurant and tell me I need to get in because the clock would strike 12. Evil spirit. And from somebody else. If you sit down and think about these things, only a person that you don't know any better. So in conclusion here with this, when Josiah kept the Passover ritual, he became a model of ritual faithfulness and originated in his heart. God instituted certain rituals of the new covenant that at least two come frequently and immediately to mind. One of them, called baptism. With the other two, we just finished discussing. Now, baptism is a ritual, a reenactment of Christ's burial and resurrection. It's not just you go get a new suit or a new dress or get your hair done. It's to go out there and celebrate what God has done for us. And that's where our mind should be. All of these rituals invite us to participate in God's mission and God's story of redemptive history. They're touchstones of continuity and stability. They reach and remind that God delights in our obedience as we seek Him through what He has commanded us to do. So it's always good when you've done that and you open your eyes up in the morning and you're still breathing. Stick your hand over the fire, over the stove, and see if you still feel it. That God has opened your eyes. I have a lot to be thankful for. One of those is being able to come here to do this. I never foresaw myself teaching Sunday school. But you know what is so important about it? When you get to reading this stuff and go and look at the other references that's in there, man, there's some interesting stuff in there. A lot of interesting stuff. You know, we continue to make sure that we keep this story in mind about Josiah and what happened. It didn't only happen in this situation. As I mentioned earlier, how many times have the Israelis been exiles from where they were? And now they get back. Remind them the old baggage has to be left behind. We anybody want to do a review, I think it's the meetings next week.